If there are people who are less understood than the Africans, it must be the people from India who look like Africans. It's not truly understood why they have isolated themselves since antiquity. It's also not understood why they really didn't develop past a certain point in some of the islands. Having civilizations like the Indus Valley and Iranians right next to them, including people like the Chinese and the Thai, it's confusing to think that they maintain their civilization up to today. Now, the word civilization is confusing. I mean their culture. Another thing is, not only are they like Africans, but they seem to embody being African more than some other Africans in the stereotype. Their original religions have nothing to do with most of the religions in India, and they also have nothing to do with a lot of the religions in Asia. It's confusing whether or not Al Masudi, when he mentions little Ethiopians, if he's talking about these people or if he's talking about actual Ethiopians from Ethiopia. In fact, most Muslim scholars that speak about Ethiopians in India are usually referring to this group. When they refer to this group, it's hard to separate between Africans and these people because they don't really give a clear answer about who is who. Now, the way I make an assumption is a lot of the times when they mention Ethiopians from outside of Africa, they will give a reason for how they came to those areas. I've been trying to separate the word Little Ethiopian from Ethiopia, and if you think about it, the word Little Ethiopian is similar to the word Negrito, which was usually given to these people by the Europeans. And so obviously their stature, their height matters a lot. It's even possible that when they mention pygmies in some European texts, they're talking about these people. You can actually tell from some of these people, the way they look, that there is an obvious transition between them and the Dravidians in India. You can still sort of tell the similarities between them and other Indians, even though DNA tests of ancient Indus Valley sort of dismisses them or says they have a small genetic role to play in the Indus Valley. Small role is still a role, but of course it's pushed to the side. I wouldn't personally say that these people need to show a great civilization or show giant stones or any of that stuff for them to matter, but it seems like that's the game of history that is played. I've tried to dismiss this by showing rock art of people, by showing all kinds of things, that the story of history doesn't always have to revolve around who has the biggest, scariest civilization. But it seems that people still come back down to that point of view. I've been trying to separate the views of the Europeans based on their personal point of view of what they thought of other people from what those people think of themselves. But I think I've actually, I have to surrender and say the European point of view has obviously won, because any pushback against that type of reality seems like most people who are most against it are pro African or pro European or pro Asian or pro Indian, that they don't want to push away these words and actually see the reality of the civilizations that existed prior to the movements. And in fact, that looking at them prior to a certain date is another European way of looking at things. That, once you introduce Europeans to a piece of land, suddenly we should not look at that piece of land because the history doesn't matter anymore. It becomes foreign history. That's why when we look back at these people from India, we need not compare them to the ancient Egyptians. We need not compare them to the Sumerians or any of the other people, but instead we need to value them as they come. We should also realize that staying, quote unquote, uncivilized for for thousands of years next to a civilization, next to other civilizations, shows one, tolerance of the other, but then two, it also shows how some of this stuff about people did not advance or people did advance or any of that stuff, a lot of it is voluntary. A lot of it is not a matter of they didn't have anyone next to them who could give them some great civilization. It's not that they don't have the mental capacity or anything like that. A lot of it is actually selective. Now, of course, these people from the islands of India, and some of them are from the mainland as well, but of course, these people are related to the other Negrito or little Ethiopians from other Asian lands. And those people have had fascinating civilizations from Thailand, the Philippines, all over, all the way to Indonesia, blah, blah, blah. We don't need to go into who went to the Americas and what they look like. What's more important is that I don't want to talk about other people outside of these people in order to glorify these people, even though they have their own pantheon, their own religion, their own point of view. Speaking of point of view and India and little Ethiopians, I want to talk about a big Ethiopian and relate it to my main idea of this arcing European thing where we have to have the glorification. You can't have foreigners in your country. Any influence will be thrown away as bad. I made a video a while back. It had a little more views than usually my videos have, but I started realizing there was a whole bunch of negative comments, and most of the people watched it for like 30 seconds and then left. And I thought to myself, what could cause this? What could make people not like this video? And then I went and checked the comments and sat down and read them one by one, even some comments which you can't see, which are banned. And I realized the thing that the people, I mean, a lot of them were from India, the thing that a lot of the people were objecting to was not that I said in that video that Ethiopians had taken charge of India at one point. They weren't even upset at that. They were upset because I said Muslims had taken over some part of India, and they said that was Muslim propaganda. But that's just the truth. Muslims were pretty strong, and at one point they took over some piece of India. The sad part is that I referenced the information, and that's where I started noticing that there's very little people in this world. I would say maybe 0.5% of people who can handle truth. The only truth that most people can handle is the truth that supports what they already believe. And that's scary because that means even people who are viewing me are to some degree viewing it hoping that I don't say something that they disagree with. And if they are like that and they start to move away every time I disagree with them, then the understanding is that I'm an echo in their head. I do not fully represent the truth, and really, I don't know why they would trust anything I say if they can't even trust their own judgment because they lie to themselves? The point of my videos is not to glorify black people or make them sound like they were better than everybody else in history. I've already specified that 100 times over. I'm one of these people who don't accept that the people who were dark skinned in the world were much better than the people who are light skinned in the world. That's not something I accept or go with. But I do want to highlight it because it's completely ignored as information in history books. And worse, even in the days of the internet, civilizations with dark skinned people are still seen as, let's say, a plaything. Like, sure, that's possible that that happened, but you know, and I can understand to some degree why some people are saying that because, of course, if people are just watching certain videos because they want to support their previous theories, like I'll give you one. I'll give you one. I've been getting a lot of backlash for saying that black people living in the Islamic world would have been way better than living in European countries. And not only did I first, when I heard that, I thought maybe I am being a little too harsh on the Europeans and I should go revisit the Arabs. And I did. I went and checked every single source I ever had, and 100% life in the Arab world and including Muslim world, whether you're talking about the Portuguese, when the Moors took over the Portuguese, when the Arabs visited the Moors, when the Arabs lived with the Malians and all these other people, and when you see free black men in the Arabic nations, or when they trade with the Swahilians, when they ask for permission, all the stuff, every piece of information I can see, there's not an arcing evil that lurks where the European looks at the African as a sort of ogre slash human. The fact that we even have kings of Ethiopian history, the fact that we even have writers of Ethiopian history, right? Think about what I'm saying to you. Writers who would talk ill about Arabs in Arab states and nothing happened to them. The fact that we have that just tells you the difference that was going on between these nations. And of course, the Arabs, it might seem like they were one uniform group. There were Persians there, there were Indians there were all kinds of people living in that time. And of course, because Indians, and taking it back to the original point of the video, because Indians and Africans to some degree were considered black people or the same, coming out of the same thing, which is Hamite. To some degree, they were both belonging to Hamites. It became a sort of thing where you can't disrespect them because, like that other Muslim scholar said, I don't need to bring him up, but like he said, no one can compare to the mathematics that was being done at the time by the Indians. And they are dark skinned black people, and that's what the people considered them at that time. Yet you use their mathematics in your Arabic texts. So how could you discriminate? Not only that, I've shown you books where Islamic scholars literally debunk racial theories that people came up with at the time. On the other side, you go to Europe, and almost every European has a theory of monstrosity when it comes to the African about why they're quote unquote deformed. Whereas in, the Middle East, you get questions about beauty and what it means. And, if you take all the races and you boil down the most beautiful woman of all the races, what is the consistency between the groups? What is it about females that you can look at an African and see a beautiful female, look at an Asian and see a beautiful female, look at a European and see a beautiful female, but they don't look the same. Theories like that, as opposed to theories of, oh yeah, we are the people, we unified the world, we made the world. Now, of course, probably one of the things that I got backlash the most, and I still have to say it again, let's say it again. I am not anti Christian. I was raised Christian. The only reason I say things that have to do with skepticism is because you can't pretend to be a person who is not biased and be biased towards any information that you have. Though I 100% believe that in the Islamic Golden Age, as a black African, you would have fared way better in the Middle East, probably due to partially their religion. Today, I absolutely know that you would probably rather live in the West as a black African than you would in the Middle East, especially if you're a recent comer and you're poor. And of course, this is very, very, very recent. I mean, even in the 60s, it was pretty harsh being of any race outside of white in America. But if we go and look at these Andamanese people, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, living next to hostile or whatever groups, and they're still there. In fact, they seem like they were being protected even during the Islamic or the Hindu days when people were well aware of them. It seemed like they just left them alone and they didn't really go into their territories. Now, of course, I'm sure someone's going to be able to prove me wrong, but they're still there and they don't seem to have developed further in a lot of these islands. And they don't seem to be developing by force, the ones that are developing. Now, of course, some people are going to point out that Indians did have a lot of racism, and they do have a lot of racism towards Africans. But remember that a lot of that racism was brought to us by Europeans who tried to confuse the world. I mean, think about the story of India and the history of India and how even their history, they were told, was, basically they were hunter gatherers until some Europeans got there. That was the story that they were being told, and they would go and tell that same story to their kids sometimes, looking at it as the most advanced point of view. Now, of course, when Indians who already knew about their history and archaeologists who discovered some of the most ancient cities over there, they could get rid of that myth and they could 100% say that India had the oldest civilization next to Egypt and the Sumerians. Then all of that was thrown away. Now, a way of keeping time, in our history today, and I have I have to mention this. I know some people are going to get upset, but I have to mention this. A way of keeping time in the timelines of our history is to mention BC and AD. Is that not a Western Christian perspective rather than choosing a completely different calendric date? Now, I won't change it. I prefer BC and AD over BCE or any of that stuff because I think that's just nonsense. I prefer BC and AD. But when you start using BC and AD, you're already in the realm of looking at things at a little different. I mean, when I look at the Bantu migration and I look at all of that, BC and AD don't mean anything in those places. What does BC really mean in a non-Christian, non-Western, almost non-influenced by the rest of the world area? It doesn't mean anything. I remember I said ancient civilization and I mentioned something. Someone was like, no, that's modern. And I realized it, a lot of these people don't even understand what their words mean. And then, of course, India. I mean, Why start at BC where things get interesting? Whereas if you go to India, you can start, you know, India, Egypt, all of these places, Sumeria, you can start pretty much put number one, the date one, roundabout where we would call 3000 BC today. Now, to finish off, again, it's the Kingdom of Congo that keeps making me think up of, you know, these topics that are about changing our point of view in general. And the reason is because the Kingdom of Congo, the more I talk about it, the more it's just a war between Christianity and the native religions. And the more I look into it, that's all it is. It's just a fight between the native religion and Christianity. And it's a hard story to tell in a mainly Christian audience. How are you going to explain that basically Christianity at one time demonized the African religion? Literally, like literally, they said that they were worshiping demons and not make Christianity look bad.